All right, the name of today's sermon is Be Valiant. If you would, turn to Proverbs chapter 28, verse 1. Must warn you, I'm a little excited today. And I think that's what kept me up half the night. Anybody else wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning some days and just pray? I guess God decided we need to have a private conversation. Proverbs chapter 28, verse 1. The wicked flee, though no one pursues, but the righteous are as bold as a lion. So last week, a group of guys from another gym, another martial arts gym, came from out of town to learn with us. Their head coach had been training with me off and on for many years. And they came Friday, and they stayed Friday night at a hotel, and then Saturday we trained. And when we got done Saturday, they invited, of course, Melissa and I to lunch, which is customary in those kind of situations. When we get there, it's very crowded. They took us to Texas Roadhouse, right? And there's a 15-year-old boy that Matt has kind of been mentoring. He does quite a bit of that. He's a really good guy. He's in a small town, probably quite, a lot like this. And he takes it and helps people the best he can. So, this 15-year-old boy is sitting with these mostly grown men at this table. Very crowded Texas Roadhouse, and the food comes. And I asked him to get blessing. He said, I've never done that before. They just put that there. All right, so this child tells us he's never done it before. Melissa and I are like, it's okay, you're going to do great. And oh my gosh, I felt the presence of God at that table. I have not heard grace given with such passion ever. It was amazing. Man, if I had it on recording, I'd play it for you right now. I never gave grace. I was like, I told that child, you're still giving grace like that at 18, I'm going to have you up here preaching. That boy, I'm going to keep track of him. That boy has the presence of God already. Gets me excited. But he's bold. Crowded room. Man, I can't get some kids to pray out loud in front of kids they know or adults they know. This young man in a crowded. Y'all ever been to Texas Roadhouse off of I-240 at a mealtime? There's a wait. You're lucky if you're not sitting on your neighbor's lap to eat. And bold. Did not care. Beautiful. So, I pray daily, multiple times a day, and I pray for all of you, and I pray for the congregation here, and I pray for the church. God has put it in my heart to encourage a spirit of harvesting. We've talked about that recently. Sorry, I'm still thinking back to that child. It was amazing. So, I wish you guys were there. But God's been putting in my heart to encourage you for discipleship, to encourage harvesting. God wants us to grow. And you guys do an amazing job with the youth. It's been impressive. It's been impressive since day one. You don't need me saying that, but I'm saying it anyways. Melissa and I were floored the first youth meeting we came to, or youth service we came to. What we need to do that with the adults as well. We need the adults in here as strong as the youth come in. And unfortunately, I'm too far away to be daily involved with this. It hurts my heart some days when I think about it. I want to come out here and find people and drag them to church. Realistically, I should come out here and invite them to church. But if you know me, I can be loud spoken and encouraging and a little strong. But I can't do that. We're an hour and a half away. You know, I have a full-time job. I don't know the area. I don't know the people. A lot of people don't like strangers, especially in areas where everybody knows everybody. Because I've tried stopping and talking to people. They don't want to talk to me. They don't know me. I'm not from around here. They don't know my grandma. My kids didn't go to school with their kids. Right? I don't work with them. I'm some guy in a car stopping in a suit, trying to talk to them, and they're like, who's this guy? And trust me, you can ask Melissa, I'll talk to anybody, I don't care. One thing I was not gifted with was shyness. I am definitely not shy. So I pray for your conviction to bring others, to talk to others, to get people in here. I pray to God for guidance. And at first, and I spent a lot of this summer, I started off with my plans. And I'm like, I'm going to go down there and we're going to talk to people out in public. I'm going to come down here on non-church days. And God said, no. I tried. This is what I want to do. We can go. No. Sit down. We're not doing that. And I don't know why. I would have loved to come out here and just shake hands and invite people to church. But I kept getting a no. We're not doing that. What God is telling me is I need you guys to do that. So, before I go down that rabbit hole too much, today's message is titled, Be Valiant. Now, when speaking about valiant people in the Bible, there's a lot to choose from. And there's a lot that ran through my head. I said, man, we can talk about Moses. Y'all know I love Moses. Right? We can talk about David. Pretty cool about David, too. But I was talking to one of the other teachers. There's a 5th grade Bible class I sit in with to help him teach. He doesn't need help teaching. Let me rephrase that. Because there's so many students, they like to have one-on-one. So we have like about a 1-to-8 ratio. So if you have more than 8 kids in your class, you get another teacher. So, yeah, it's amazing. It is amazing what they have going on there. And they're growing. Unlike a lot of private Christian schools are shrinking, they have grown 5-10% every year in the last 5 years. This year, I think we're going to hit about 15 to 20%. Because as of day one, we still had kids trying to enroll. So, he said, and he's a athletic director, right? He said one of his favorite books in the Bible is Esther. And when I was praying, and I pray all week, God, what do you want me to talk about? I actually started 2 other sermons this week. Because again, sometimes it's what I want to talk about. And God says, sit down. We ain't doing that. Right? I was talking about that a little bit ago. And then God said, this is what we're talking about. And I'm like, but I had something else. And he's like, nah. So I typed this last night. Got done pretty late. But I was excited about it. And I think that kept me up half the night. So, one of his favorite books is Esther. So I was contemplating and thinking about Esther, and I just started reading it. Yes, I read the book of Esther last night. It's not a very long book. Right? It's a really good book to read. Really good book. And believe it or not, we're not going to actually read from Esther today because I read it, so I went ahead and wrote what happened. Because I'm sure y'all want to go eat lunch at some point. All right, so if we look at the word valiant, it's defined as, again, Google, because I can buy 20 Bibles, but I don't know how to buy a dictionary. Possessing or showing courage or determination. Possessing or showing courage or determination. If you read the book of Esther and study it, you see a lot. A lot of courage, a lot of determination. Book of Esther is one of the only two books in the Old Testament named after a woman. And there's actually no quotes or mentions of the book of Esther in the New Testament. Giving you a little bit of facts here, then we'll get in the meat of this. And you know they don't actually mention God in Esther. And I had to read the whole book to find out. I didn't see God mentioned one time. Because I was reading a scholar's notes on Esther, and I was like, I've read it a few times and I don't recall. So I didn't want to, I like reading the Bible. What are we talking about? So I read the whole book of Esther last night. Melissa was like, are you done with your sermon yet? I'm like, I'm close. I got one page of notes typed and almost done reading the book because I get down that rabbit hole anyways. So, in the book of Esther, we have discipleship. And we have a valiant woman standing up for the people of God. Which is something, I know they've mentioned some female prophets in the Old Testament, but they don't really talk about female Jewish leaders very often. Usually I'd read a specific scripture from the book we're talking about, but I'm going to go over an overview unless you guys want to be reminded that I was raised Assemblies of God, and we'll get out of here about 2 o'clock. But I want everybody to hear the story of Esther and her caretaker, relative. I'd have to look at a chart to make sure. Mordecai. Esther was Mordecai's uncle's daughter. I think that'd be some kind of cousin. Regardless, he was given guardianship of her because she had no parents. It doesn't say what happened to them, but they were gone. But they valiantly stood up for the Jewish people, God's chosen people. So we have King Xerxes, and depending on which translation of the Bible you read, Xerxes is his Greek name, and then how they put it in some of the other translations is King Ahasuerus. I can't pronounce it, therefore I use Xerxes. I like King Xerxes way better. Besides the NIV that I'm reading from, used King Xerxes. He was a ruling Persian king. And that, the Greek name, and depending on what transcript your translation was translated from, that was your bonus lesson for the day. He threw a 7-day feast at the end of an extended period of time where he was showing off all the wealth he had, all the success he's had. On the 7th day of the feast, King Xerxes sent some of his men to go, and in one translation, I read it, the book Esther, in a couple of translations last night, but that's all right. I love it. So, a group of men, some call them officers of the court, another translation called them eunuchs. It's realistic that they were both. He sent these men to escort the Queen Vashti, to the feast, but she refused. She said she's not going, and this angered King Xerxes. He sought guidance from his counselors, his friends, and they were like, well, we can't have the women of the nation rebelling because she sets the example for everyone else, so we have to deal with this. So they thought her actions, being so public, needed to be corrected. They convinced him to have her removed from the position and replaced. Under Persian rule, there was a Jew named Mordecai. Mordecai was from a family that had been taken from Jerusalem by King Nebuchadnezzar many, many years before this. Mordecai was a caretaker of his uncle's daughter. Her name was Hadassah, This is why I love how some using their other names. But we know her as Esther. One of these days I'm going to get good at pronouncing these. King Xerxes had all the beautiful virgin women of the land gathered up, and Esther was one of them. They were gathered up and put under care of some of the servants, some of the people that served King Xerxes. She specifically went under the care of Haggai. And Haggai favored her and took great care of her, gave her extra this and that. It lists the things in the book of Esther if you'd like to go back and read to see what extra things she received. Mordecai had instructed Esther because he was concerned for her safety because the Jews weren't exactly the most well thought of in the area, which is common when a people takes over another people, who takes over another people, because now we're on a Persian rule, not a Babylonian rule. He even went as far as to provide her some maidservants to make sure she was taken care of. Mordecai had instructed Esther to keep her Jewish heritage private, and she listened. And yet he paced in front of the station where the women were kept until he found out how she was that day, every day. He may not have been his daughter, but he cared for her as if it was his. And he was worried about her. Now, what I missed when I was younger growing up, reading the book of Esther, 12 months of preparation. So for a year, he paced in front of her quarters, or where her quarters was. For years, he was bold enough to go to the same place as a known Jew in front of the Persian king's property. It doesn't say how far away this was from the palace, but it was a separate quarter at the time. And paced back and forth, hoping to hear a word about essentially his adopted daughter. After that 12 months, she was brought in front of King Xerxes. All the girls were one by one. And King Xerxes, according to the Bible, loved her immediately, crowned her queen, and threw her a feast. And this guy sure loves feasts. He named the feast of Esther. One of these days, I'm going to name a feast after my wife. He even made this day a holiday. I wanted to give everyone a back story so everybody understood, especially the young people who've never heard this story before. Mordecai loved Esther greatly, and he kept watch over her, wanting information still every day, even though she was moved over to the palace. He started hanging out at the palace gate. So I got to thinking, why would they let this normal, everyday man, this Jew, stand out in front of the palace gate? And I started reading some stuff, different translations, different scholars' opinions. Apparently, they've actually found the name Mordecai multiple times in the Persian records. And they said more than likely he had some prestige even before the rest of the book happens. He was some kind of accountant. So he was hanging. So he got away with, like, there's record of him being given a tour of the palace at some point. So Mordecai overheard two of the guards. Again, depending on what translation you read, one I read called them eunuchs. One I read called them officers of the courts. One I read called them guards. He heard them talking. What's important is they were angry at King Xerxes. Again, their explanation, if you start reading deeper into everybody else's study notes, their explanation was they were angry because of replacement of Queen Vashti. Apparently, to some groups of the people, she was popular. So Mordecai was able to tell Queen Esther about the plot against the king. These two guards were trying to go hurt the king. Queen Esther told this information to King Xerxes. It says in the Bible that information was confirmed, and they hung him. Now, when I read, I want to know how they hung him, because hanging could mean a lot of things back then. The Persians were impaling people at the time. So those two guys were impaled for the information he provided. And while these events were occurring, a man named Haman was promoted to higher in the courts. So far we have Mordecai discipling Esther, and Esther being bold enough to trust and tell the things that she has been told from Mordecai. And so far she is still keeping her Jewish heritage to herself for her safety. But during these events, a man named Haman was promoted to a high position in the king's court. He was such a high position that all were supposed to bow and pay homage when he passed. Mordecai refused. This angered Haman. Haman was an evil person. When he found out Mordecai was a Jew, he decided he wasn't going to take it out on just Mordecai. He was going to take it out on all the Jews under control of King Xerxes. Mordecai put his own safety at risk for the safety of Esther and for the safety of King Xerxes. He did what was right. And then he refused to bow to Haman. Now, there's two reasons he might not have bowed to Haman. I'm sure there's many more, but there's two obvious reasons. One, so the Mosaic law, if we look at the words bow and pay homage, it's basically bow extremely low in worship, as you would God, and they're not allowed to worship, obviously, anyone besides God. We know some others, such as Daniel, who got in trouble for the same thing. It's happened a few times. It happened to the Christians in the early church when they refused to acknowledge Caesar as a god. But if you look at it, earlier in the book, they hinted towards Mordecai. Not hinted, they talk about Mordecai and his heritage. If you look at it, Mordecai was a Benjamite, and he was related to King Saul. Haman, come to find out, was related to King Agag. King Agag was the king of the Amalekites, which, if you remember, King Saul was supposed to wipe them and their animals completely out. And he didn't. He let the king initially live and didn't slaughter all the animals, saying, well, I was going to sacrifice them to God. Samuel came in and killed the king. Well, this wouldn't have if Saul would listen, but this caused a long feud between the people. By offering to give King Xerxes money, Haman was able to convince King Xerxes that would sign a law and to encourage the people to kill and plunder the Jews. Queen Esther found out about this through a message her and Mordecai communicated, a little back and forth. And the significance of that is back then, if you're talking about, in a negative fashion, laws that the king signed off on, you can actually be executed for treason. And yet, she was courageous. She was courageous even further. I don't know about y'all, when you see these movies with kings and queens, the queen can go right to the king, that's her husband, right? Well, apparently in that culture, no one can go to the king without being invited. And if you go to the king without being invited and he doesn't welcome you in, when you get there, they execute him, regardless of who it is. So she went to the king, and the king allowed her in. Now, I believe her valiant action at that point, her courage, gave her God's favor. God wasn't going to let her be executed there in the palace floors. God was going to let her stand up for his chosen people. So when she went and requested an audience with the king, he offered to give her half the kingdom. He was very smitten and in love with her. But what she asked of him is to invite Haman, the one that convinced him to have all the Jews killed, to a banquet the following day. Haman was very pleased with the information until on his way home he passed Mordecai, who again refused to bow. When he arrived home, he bragged of his good fortune, but still complained to his wife, his family, his servants, that that Jew wouldn't bow to him. That Jew wouldn't show him homage, wouldn't worship him for the position he was in. He's so important. That Jew was standing up to him. His wife suggested he had some gallows made, and they gave the measurement, and apparently that measurement is very tall and very open for all to see. And she recommended that Haman go to the king and request that that he has Mordecai hung on those gallows he built. So here's where I think it gets good. And when I stopped and read it, I was like, man, I've never really believed, or not believed, but thought of this before. I believe that God was pleased with the courageous actions Esther and Mordecai had taken so far. Esther chapter 6, verse 1 states that night the king could not sleep. Sometimes when God wants to speak to you at 3 o'clock in the morning, he does it. And God wanted to speak to King Xerxes. King Xerxes asked his servants to bring his records. He asked them, they're reading the records to him, and it comes to Mordecai, who told of the plot, and that's when the king recalled that he had never actually done anything to honor Mordecai. So he asked the servants to verify, did we do anything to honor this man? And they said no. So when he found out, he asked who was in the court. And I think God has a great way of working things out for those who are bold. Haman was walking into the court to ask King Xerxes to hang Mordecai on the gallows. And he seemed pretty happy about this. So, when he walks in, King Xerxes says, hey, if there's a man that pleases me and I want to honor him, what should I do? And Haman's thinking his good luck, his good fortune's continuing. He's been promoted to high up in the courts. He's been invited to have a banquet with the queen, just the king and him, nobody else. So he tells him, well, if the king wanted to honor someone, he should give him a robe that he's worn. Give him the king's robe. He should put him on a horse that king's ridden. Give him the king's horse. And he should have one of the officers of the court parade him around the public courtyard, the public circle, to show him off, to show how important and thankful the king is. Again, this is where God had a lovely sense of timing and sense of humor. And King Xerxes says, that's a great idea. I want you to go find Mordecai, put my robe on him, put him up on my horse, and walk him around. The man that he came to say, hey, let's hang this guy. The man that was bold enough to stand up for him, bold enough to tell about the plot, bold enough to stand in front of the palace day in, day out, stand in front of the women's quarter day in, day out to make sure his daughter's okay, when they could have taken care of him, killed him, ran him off, done whatever, is now being paraded around, dressed in the king's robe, riding the king's horse, by the man who wants to have him hung. And again, when we read hung, in the Persian time, their version of hanging was impalement. He wanted to have this man impaled, and instead, he's escorting him on a horse. When you're bold, whether you see it or not, or expect it or not, God will take care of you. So there was twice Esther invited Haman and the king to a banquet. And on the second time, when the king asked again, what can I do for my queen? Can I give you half the kingdom? Right? He's romantic when he didn't have to be. He was smitten. He was in love. She said, I want you to show me and my people mercy. There is a man that wants us all killed. King Xerxes became angry and asked who would do such a thing. She boldly told him, Haman. He went off and had some thought alone. Haman was one of his higher ups, one of his relied persons, someone that came from royal blood, someone that he probably at this point still held in some kind of respect, whatever kind of respect a Persian king might have for someone beneath them. And he came to a conclusion. He had Mordecai hung on the gallows he built. He had Haman hung on the gallows he built for Mordecai. I was saying that backwards, my fault. I was getting a little too excited, getting a little words mixed up. So we had Haman hung on the gallows he built for Mordecai. And then he gave all of Haman's property to Esther, who in return turned it over to Mordecai to be taken care of. And she continued to be bold. She's like, this is awesome, this is great. Her boldness got rid of the threat, the one that wanted to destroy all of her people in the land. When Haman paid the king to write this law saying on this day, Jews can be murdered without any repercussions, and you can rob them blind and nobody will care. Haman had planned on doing it himself. He wanted to destroy the Jewish nation, God's chosen people. But Esther and Mordecai together stood bold. And now Mordecai was in possession of his property. Esther owned it. But they still had one problem. In the Persian culture back then, even the king can't overturn his own law. If he wrote a law, he can't erase it. He can't say, I was just kidding, I changed my mind. So what she did, she asked him, I need one more thing from you. And he's like, anything. Write the law, I'll stamp it with my seal, and we'll send it everywhere. The law they wrote told the Jews to gather up together and defend themselves, that they have every obligation and every right. Day one, just in the city by the palace, they killed 500 of the Jews' enemies. It gets better. They capture and kill all 10 of Haman's sons. So the king Xerxes told Queen Esther, you guys have been successful. This has been great. What else do you need? What can I do for you? She says, well, can I have one more day? One more day where the Jews are allowed to do to protect themselves and rid themselves of their enemy. She was bold. These are the Persians. The people getting killed are Persians. They belong to the king. And she's saying, hey, thank you for letting us kill your people. Can we do it again? Can we go back and kill some more of these people that are trying to kill us? That following day, they killed over 75,000 when he said yes. 75,000 enemies of the Israelites, of the Jewish people, of God's chosen people, because she was bold enough to say, let's do it again. And just icing on the cake, she took Haman's sons and had them, all 10 of them, displayed on the gallows with King Xerxes' blessings. Mordecai was made second in command only to answer to the king. I promise I'm wrapping it up. I know we have a meeting. Mordecai discipled Esther. Mordecai discipled Esther. This wouldn't have happened if Mordecai didn't disciple Esther. And when she was out of the house under the king's control, he continued to disciple Esther. Esther, listen, Esther was bold. Mordecai, I'd imagine, is an older man at this point, standing in front of the palace gate. Even if he was just a normal citizen and didn't have prestige, they might have been like, well, this crazy old man can just hang out there. I mean, he's old. What's he going to do? But he was bold and stood by the gates, and Esther was bold and stood up for her people. Esther was valiant to approach the king with her request, and then valiant to set Haman up to be executed, to tell on him, and said, I don't know how else to say that, tell on him in front of her husband, so that he may be executed, so that her husband can feel the exact way, anger that he should have felt. And again, back then, if you read the history, you approach the king, most times out of 10, you're going to wind up dead. She approached the king. She was courageous. She approached the king knowing she might get executed for violating the law, when instead he invited her in. And then she approached the king about coming to a banquet. Can you imagine if you want to tell the king this information, having to hold it for 2 days, how courageous that was? She has the man that wants to have not just her killed, her family killed, all the people of Israel that lived in the Persian territory, which was huge back then, murdered. And she's eating dinner with them, preparing dinner with them, because she knew just blurting it out wasn't going to work. She had to set it up. And to hold your composure is courageous. To hold your composure, she was valiant. Because of their courage and determination, the people defeated their enemies. One more thing. 2 more things, actually. Those 2 days that they killed over 75,000 of God's chosen people's enemies, they made it a holiday. A holiday. Because she stood up and said, this is what we're going to do to save the people. I do want to close with this. How will you be valiant? If you didn't know, we are God's chosen people. Jesus Christ assured that. He died on his cross for all of our sins. When he did that, we became his. When we accepted him, we became his. We became his chosen people. It is God the Father and God the Son, because God the Father is our Father as well. How will you stand courageous for God? How will you fulfill Jesus' command from Matthew 28, verse 18 through 20? Then Jesus came to them and said, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Therefore go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I have commanded you, and surely I am with you always, to the very end of age.